Police have DNA, fingerprints, and a lot of physical evidence. What they don't have is the person who murdered a 19-year-old Three Rivers woman in 1988.
It was the first time many could remember something like this happening in the small southwest Michigan town. And in the 25 years since, nothing has come close. Cathy Swartz's murder was bloody and brutal, and it happened with her 9-month-old daughter in the next room. As WSBT's Kristen Bean shows us, even 2 decades later, it still doesn't make sense.
Today, police announced an arrest in a cold case murder that's haunted the city of Three Rivers for more than 30 years.
Well, Michael Martin was down there today as we await for the suspect in this case to be extradited from South Carolina.
It was the 2nd of December, 1988, 3 weeks before Christmas. Inside a small 2-story apartment at Riverside Townhouses in Three Rivers, Michigan, a young woman had spent the morning making sure everything was perfect for the holiday season ahead. The Christmas tree was up. Stuffed Muppet toys, Kermit, Miss Piggy, and Fozzie Bear were already sitting under it, wrapped and waiting. A little book called Baby Kermit's Christmas lay beside them. 9-month-old Courtney was about to experience her very first Christmas, and her mother, 19-year-old Cathy Swartz, was determined to make it magical. Cathy had every reason to be happy. She was young, she was in love, and she was engaged to a man who adored her. That morning, her fiancé Mike Warner had kissed her goodbye just after 5 in the morning and headed off to his job at a paper plant about 30 minutes away. Cathy was still in her nightshirt, the apartment warm and decorated, the baby fed and settled. Nobody on that quiet street could have imagined that before the afternoon arrived, the inside of that cozy little apartment would look like something out of a nightmare. Mike Warner came home from work at around 3:30 that afternoon, just like he always did. He expected to find Cathy on the couch, watching her favorite soap opera, Guiding Light, with the baby nearby. Instead, when he pushed open the front door, he saw blood. At first, he told himself maybe she had cut herself, just a few drops on the floor of the foyer. He stepped further inside. Then he saw the walls. The blood was smeared all the way up the staircase railing. It was on the walls. It was everywhere. He later told investigators it looked like it had been painted on. His legs carried him up the stairs before his mind had fully caught up with what he was seeing. He looked to his right and saw Courtney standing silently in her crib in the baby's room, unharmed, not making a sound. He looked to his left. Cathy was on the floor of their bedroom doorway. Her nightshirt was pulled almost completely off. Blood covered her face. She was not moving. Mike Warner screamed her name, ran to a neighbor to call the police, then ran back inside to grab his baby daughter. He never got to marry the woman he loved, and the tiny girl he had planned to help raise would grow up never knowing her mother's face, except from photographs. When police arrived at apartment 102 that December evening, what they found inside stopped even the most experienced officers in their tracks. Rookie cop Mike Money, one of the first on the scene, described a trail of violence that told the story of a desperate, terrifying struggle. It had started in the kitchen, moved through the foyer near the front door, continued up the staircase and down the hallway, and ended in the bedroom. Cathy had been beaten. She had been strangled by hand, and then her throat had been cut. One wound alone, 2 inches deep, severing both the artery that carried blood to her brain and the vein that carried it back to her heart. The medical examiner would later say the beating alone likely lasted 15 minutes, based on the color of the bruising. Cuts on her hands told investigators she had fought back with everything she had. Michigan State Police crime scene technician Ken Laninga, a veteran investigator, arrived to process the scene. Even for someone who had seen a great deal in his career, what he walked into that evening was unlike anything he had encountered before. It appeared as though she was fighting for her life. Laninga later recalled, she was trying to survive. Unfortunately, that was not the case. He thought about the baby, about the thin apartment walls, about what Courtney must have heard. The phone in the bedroom had a bloody fingerprint on it. The phone line had been cut. A bare, left footprint, a size 9, had been left in blood on the bathroom floor. The bathwater was still running when investigators arrived, suggesting the killer had used the shower to clean himself up before walking out past the Christmas tree and through the back door, knocking over a candy cane on his way out. Then came the discovery that made even the seasoned investigators go quiet. The crime scene team had brought new equipment that evening, a special light that, used with fluorescent powder and goggles in complete darkness, could reveal things invisible to the naked eye. When they turned off the lights and swept the wand across the refrigerator door, words glowed green in the darkness. Metallica, and then, Harley was here. They moved the light over Kathy's body. On the inside of her upper thigh, written in something that had only become visible under that special light, were 3 more words. "I was here." Leninga later admitted it blew their minds. Nobody in that room had ever seen anything like it. Police were certain the killer had written those words. What they could not yet understand was why they were invisible to the naked eye, or what they had been written with. But they noticed something else. Something that would drive the investigation in a very specific direction and very nearly destroy an innocent young man's life for the next 35 years. There was one more strange detail from that day, one that has never fully been explained. At around 12:10 in the afternoon, right in the window of time when Kathy was being murdered, a car came speeding along the road by the St. Joseph River, less than a mile away. It took a bend far too fast, crossed the center line, and plunged headfirst into the cold water. The driver was 24-year-old Christina Shelton. Her 3-year-old daughter was strapped into the back seat. Rescuers pulled them both from the submerged car, but Christina died in hospital shortly afterwards. Her little girl survived. What police would only later reveal was that Christina Shelton had lived in the same apartment complex as Cathy Swartz, on the same block. And she had died at almost the exact moment Kathy was being killed. Was it a coincidence? Had Christina seen something in the parking lot, the killer arriving or fleeing, and panicked? Had someone been chasing her? No witnesses reported seeing another vehicle force her off the road. But neighbors pointed out the bend where she crashed was one of the easiest on that entire road. A person would have had to be in a serious state of panic to lose control there. The question haunted investigators for years. It still does, because Christina Shelton took whatever she may or may not have seen with her to the bottom of that river. From the very beginning, detectives were confident. They had the fingerprint, they had the footprint, they had the glowing words on the refrigerator and on Kathy's body. They had an FBI profile that suggested the killer was a young male, probably between 15 and 25, who lived nearby and almost certainly knew the victim. There were no signs of forced entry, and everyone who knew Kathy said the same thing. She locked her doors religiously and would never have opened them to a stranger. Maybe they sat there and talked, the prosecutor on the case, Jeffrey Middleton, later speculated. He probably didn't come in like a wild-eyed killer. He came in and said, "Hey, how are you doing?" And then it went south. Kathy had no known enemies. She had grown up on a small farm in the nearby village of Mendon, been in Girl Scouts and 4-H, had a pony as a child. Her high school class was so small it barely filled 2 pages of the yearbook. She had given birth to Courtney in March 1988, moved to 3 Rivers, and met Mike Warner in September of that year. They had got engaged just 3 weeks before the murder. Everyone described her as warm, strong, a devoted mother. Her best friend Jennifer Outman said Courtney was Kathy's entire world. So who had she let into that apartment on the morning of December the 2nd? The answer seemed obvious almost immediately, and it pointed directly at a 19-year-old boy whose life was about to be turned completely upside down. Troy Schult was Kathy's ex-boyfriend. And from the moment investigators found those glowing words on the refrigerator, he was in their sights. Because Troy Schult was obsessed with Metallica. All his friends knew it, and he loved Harley-Davidson motorcycles so much that it had become his nickname. He even had a Harley sticker on the back window of his Ford Ranger. Harley was here. The words on the refrigerator seemed to scream his name. There had been reports of a rocky relationship between Troy and Kathy. His own mother had heard the whispers. A witness told police they had seen his truck near the apartment on the afternoon of the murder, and Troy had no alibi. 3 days after the murder, Police arrested him and charged him with Cathy's killing. The arrest made the front pages. Troy insisted he was innocent. He told detectives he had written the words on the refrigerator with a red marker months earlier at a party and had wiped them off, which would explain why they were no longer visible. He said he had written on Cathy's leg at the same time. As a joke, investigators sent his fingerprints and footprints to the state crime lab in Grand Rapids. They were certain they had their man. Ken Laninga received the prints and laid them next to the evidence from the crime scene. It was not him. The fingerprint on the phone did not belong to Troy Schult. The footprint in the bathroom did not belong to Troy Schult. Laninga picked up the phone. It was not the call anyone had wanted to make. 9 days after his arrest, Troy was released from jail with almost no public explanation. But in a small town, silence is not the same as innocence. The whispers followed him everywhere. People on the street believed they knew what he had done. He quit his senior year of high school and could not bring himself to go back. The nickname that had once been a point of pride became something he could barely hear without flinching. He spent the next 35 years living under the shadow of a crime he did not commit. With their most obvious suspect cleared, detectives expanded their search. They looked at Michael Howard, the man identified through a court-ordered paternity test taken 4 days after the murder as Courtney's biological father. He had a possible motive. Maybe he had not wanted the responsibility of fatherhood or the financial consequences of it. But Howard had a solid alibi, and his prints did not match either. They looked at Mike Warner, Cathy's fiancé. Investigators noted his flat emotional response in interviews, finding him hard to read. But his alibi was confirmed. He had been at work all day, 30 minutes away, and his prints did not match. Police released a composite sketch of a woman seen in the area who they believed might be a suspect or an accomplice. Nothing came of it. A neighbor reported coming home that same day to find pry marks on their apartment door. Detectives believed it was staged to make the murder look like the work of a random burglar. They remained convinced this was someone Cathy knew. For 6 solid months, the lead detective in the case staked out the cemetery where Cathy was buried every single day, hoping the killer would come to pay his respects. Occasionally, he found a single rose on the gravestone, left by someone whose identity he never managed to confirm. On the anniversary of the murder, investigators set up a hidden camera in a trailer near the grave and filmed for 3 days before and 3 days after the date. That was how they found one man, shy, quiet, withdrawn, who came to the graveside and buried a small friendship ring he said Cathy had given him in elementary school. His prints were checked. He was eliminated. Police then began the most extraordinary door-to-door operation the town had ever seen. Over the following years, they fingerprinted and took footprints from more than 4,000 people, high school classmates, school dropouts, Burger King co-workers, regulars at the bowling alley where Cathy's father worked, known sex offenders, friends of friends, even convicted criminals who were already behind bars. They took footprints from corpses at funeral homes, multiple times. Dead people whose names had come up in the investigation were not eliminated until their prints had been checked. Every single person cooperated. Not one person said no, because every innocent person understood that the easiest way to remove themselves from suspicion was to give the police what they needed. The footprint they were chasing became something of an obsession. A size 9 left barefoot, every ridge and whorl preserved in blood on the bathroom floor. Laninga later said the detectives at Three Rivers Police became some of the best footprint analysts in the region, simply because they had to do it so many times. Nothing matched. Investigators considered whether this might be the work of a serial killer. 2 women in northern Indiana, within 2 hours of Three Rivers, had been killed in strikingly similar ways in the months that followed. Both living alone, both found with their throats cut. One killed with scissors like Cathy, both murdered on a Friday. The lead detective attended one of the funerals, scanning the mourners, looking for a face he might recognize from Three Rivers. He found nothing. Years became decades. Prosecutor Middleton began writing letters to the local newspaper every 5 years. At the 1-year mark, then 10, then 20, then 30, reminding readers the case was still open, still unsolved, still waiting. The thousands of pages of police reports sat in boxes, yellowing. Evidence had gone missing over the years. Shower curtains, interview tapes, polygraph recordings, a camera seized from the bedroom. What remained was catalogued and reorganized by students from Western Michigan University's cold case program, who spent hours scanning 10,000 pages of documents into a searchable digital archive. Cathy's daughter, Courtney, grew up with grandparents who loved her and protected her for as long as they could. They told her when she was in first grade that a bad man had hurt her mummy and that her mummy was in heaven. In fourth grade, they sat her down again and told her the fuller truth. At 16, her grandfather placed a box of police reports and newspaper clippings in front of her and let her read everything. She read it all, and she grew up looking at every face she passed in town, wondering. In 2012, members of a cold case task force sat down with the original lead detective, Kenny Baker, who was by then battling cancer. Baker walked them through everything he remembered. The theory that someone had moved Cathy's body after the killing, the missing evidence, the suspect he had never been able to prove. He was still certain Schultes had been involved, even after the prints cleared him. His theory was that a second person had returned to the apartment to help clean up. Police reports indicated there were rumors that Troy's father might have helped him, but Troy's father had died before detectives could take his prints. The funeral home refused to hand them over without a warrant that never came. A new bloodstain had also been discovered on the pink phone in the bedroom, one that did not belong to Cathy, did not belong to Mike Warner, did not belong to Troy Schultes, and did not belong to Michael Howard. It belonged to an unknown male. It was entered into CODIS, the national DNA database. No match came back. The fingerprint was in AFIS, the national fingerprint system. No match there either. The killer, whoever he was, had either never been arrested for anything in his life, or the prints simply were not in the system. Or perhaps, as some investigators quietly feared, he was already dead. Then, in May 2022, the Michigan State Police Crime Lab made a decision that would change everything. They sent a frozen DNA sample, taken from the bloody fingerprint on Cathy's pink phone, to a small forensic laboratory in suburban Houston, Texas. The lab was called Othram. It had been founded in 2019 with one specific purpose: to solve cases that had exhausted every other option. Using technology that could build detailed genetic profiles from the tiniest and most degraded DNA samples, profiles based on hundreds of thousands of markers rather than the standard 20, Othram scientists could enter those profiles into public genealogy databases and begin tracing family trees outward through distant relatives, fifth cousins, sixth cousins, people who had never met the suspect and did not know they shared blood with a killer. By January 2023, the scientists at Othram had an answer. Cathy Swartz's killer was one of 4 brothers, the sons of John and Judith Waters, who had raised their family just north of 3 Rivers. Now it was a matter of narrowing it down. The youngest Waters brother was already in the DNA database. His profile did not match. 2 other brothers who still lived in the area agreed to give samples voluntarily when a detective contacted them under the pretense of routine follow-up interviews. One of those brothers, Son Waters, met with the detective at the 3 Rivers Police Department. In the course of the conversation, he mentioned that his brother Robert had left Michigan years ago and moved to South Carolina. He had got into some trouble as a juvenile, Sonne explained, and his wife had been determined to give him a fresh start somewhere else. Robert Waters had gone on to build a successful plumbing business. He was married. He had children. He lived in a home worth $500,000. And now, the DNA from his brother had narrowed it down to him as the only remaining possibility. There was something else investigators had not fully appreciated until now. Robert Waters had been mentioned, once, in a single line, somewhere in those 10,000 pages of police reports from 1988. Cathy's fiancé, Mike Warner, had told detectives back then that an old childhood friend named Robert Waters had visited the apartment about a month before the murder. Warner had run into him at the grocery store and invited him over, but Waters had moved away to Arizona before the murder. Police had taken him off the list without ever checking his prints. He was one line in 10,000 pages, and for 35 years, nobody had found him. On the morning of Sunday, April 30th, 2023, 2 detectives knocked on the door of a house in Beaufort, South Carolina. They were careful. They gave nothing away. They told Robert Waters, now 53 years old, that they were simply working through a list of names from the old case and wanted to clear people who had moved out of state. Waters agreed to come to the local police department. Then he did not show up. A taped phone call followed, in which the detective again played down the visit as routine. Waters' attorney was contacted. The detective was direct with the attorney. They had search warrants for Waters' DNA and prints. There was an unmarked car watching the house, and running would be a serious mistake. By mid-morning, Waters was sitting in the Beaufort Police Department, being fingerprinted. For 7 hours, the detective made small talk: coffee prices, LASIK surgery, plastic plumbing pipes, the cost of homeowner association fees. Waters chatted happily. He showed no signs of nerves. Back in Michigan, a lab was running his prints against the bloody fingerprint on Cathy's pink phone. They had to roll his fingertips 3 times to make sure they had clean impressions. At 5:45 in the afternoon, the Three Rivers detective walked into the room. The prints matched. The footprint matched. The DNA matched. Robert Odell Waters was placed in handcuffs and charged with the murder of Cathy Swartz. 34 years and 5 months after he walked out of her apartment, past the Christmas tree, and into the cold December air. He never made it to trial. 5 days and 8 hours after his arrest, guards found Robert Waters dead in his cell at the Beaufort County Detention Center. He had used a bedsheet. On the table in his cell, investigators found pamphlets about creation and forgiveness. He had been held in the general population, alone in a cell, not under any kind of suicide watch. Cathy Swartz, who had spent her entire life waiting for this moment, was 34 years old when she heard the news. "He's a coward," she said. She had been preparing to go to court. She had not needed him to speak or look at her. She just wanted him to feel her presence in that room, to know that the baby he had left standing in that crib had grown up, had children of her own, and had never stopped asking who had taken her mother from her. That moment was taken from her too. Cathy's best friend, Jennifer Outman, was furious. She wanted to know why someone arrested after hiding from justice for 35 years had not been placed on suicide watch from the moment he arrived in that cell. Troy Schult, the young man who had lost his high school years, his reputation, and decades of his life to whispers and stares, heard the news in his mother's home in Three Rivers, where he had eventually returned. His mother, Pearl, ran to tell him the moment she heard. "It was smiles," she said, but she was clear-eyed about what it meant. "It's a day late. It doesn't improve his health." Mike Warner, the man who had come home from work to find the woman he loved dead on the floor, now lives near his mother outside of town. He rides his bicycle most days, pulling his dog in a wagon, picking up bottles and cans. He told investigators that what happened that December turned him into an alcoholic for years. When Courtney came to visit his mother as a teenager, he walked in, saw her face, so much like her mother's, and walked straight back out. Courtney has seen him around town on his bike since. "I told my kids," she said. "I said, that's the man my mum was going to marry. He was going to adopt me. It just didn't happen that way." The grandparents who raised Courtney, David and Audrey Swartz, died before the case was solved. So did the original lead detective, Kenny Baker, who spent years staking out a cemetery and taking footprints from the dead, convinced the answer was somewhere in those boxes. He was right. He never got to know it. As for the 2 young women killed in Indiana in 1989, Lisa Kopanakis and Sherry Herr, killed the same way, on Fridays, alone in their homes, their throats cut with what appeared to be scissors. Their cases remain unsolved. Robert Waters' DNA is now in CODIS. If his profile matches evidence from another crime scene, investigators will know. Cathy Swartz does not believe she has the full picture yet. "That's not just something a person goes and does," she has said. Cathy Swartz was 19 years old. She had a Muppets Christmas planned for her daughter. She had a man who brought her flowers and left her love notes. She had a whole life ahead of her. The man who took it from her was not a monster who arrived in the dark. He was someone who knocked on the door and was let inside and was offered the ordinary warmth of a friend's home. And then he destroyed everything in it. He spent 35 years building a new life in South Carolina. A business, a family, a $500,000 home. He coached nobody to suspect him and gave investigators nothing to find. He almost got away with it. He didn't. Because Cathy had fought back. Because her blood was on that phone. Because a lab in Houston found him in the branches of a family tree. Because nobody ever stopped looking. Do you consider this justice? Let me know in the comments below. Also, like and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out on new videos.